are the advantages of GA4? What is the new model of tracking user behavior? We're learning how to train up and get a handle on GA4 with Krista Seiden today on The Edge.
Go! Your weekly digital marketing trends with industry trend-setting guests. Powered by your digital marketing pioneers, Site Strategics. This week's featured guest is Krista Seiden, founder and principal consultant at KS Digital. Now, here's your host, Aaron Sparks.
Wix is the title sponsor of this Krista Seiden interview series. We're proud to have Wix as the title sponsor of Edge of the Web. You can learn more at edgeofthewebradio.com/Wix. Wix takes care of structured data markups for you and adds them by default to your most important pages, including your product pages, courses, and blog posts. Wix is a fantastic closed source CMS. We'll talk more about them today on the show. This is Edge of the Web Radio. I'm your host, Aaron Sparks. Every week we bring you amazing guests to chat about digital marketing, news, and trends. We unpack a key marketing topic for our digital marketing audience. So whether or not you're a part of a company or a marketing firm or a freelancer, this show is for you. Make sure you check out all the recent shows over at edgeofthewebradio.com. That's edgeofthewebradio.com. Just want to let you know who will be coming up on the show in the next few episodes. Coming up, Jason Bernard and Bill Hartzer. Make sure to check out the recent shows, Johnny Ross, Mattol Ghani, and Mark Traphagen of SEO Clarity, as well as product-led SEO from Eli Schwartz. If you're interested in being part of the show, drop us a line at info@edgeofthewebradio.com. Set your reminders to YouTube as well to get notified when we set these videos aloft there. Be sure to go over to ratethispodcast.com/edge today. Hey, we'd love to hear from you. Go over to ratethispodcast.com/edge today to give us some feedback on how we're doing or what you like about this podcast. We're eager to hear from you. Help us share the show with the digital marketing world. Again, go over to ratethispodcast.com/edge. Make sure you check out the weekly news podcast that we have as well, an accompanying to our interview series. It's covering the most recent digital news of the week and much more regarding Google updates, all things digital marketing, with our regular co-host Morty Oberstein over at Wix. You never know what we're actually going to say or what he's going to say and what I have to clean up after. So go check us out as we roll through the news each and every week. So with that said, let's turn around. Let's meet this week's industry expert guest, Krista Seiden. Let me tell you about Krista Seiden. Today's guest has a decade of experience in digital analytics and was first seen by our team here at Site Strategics from the Google Analytics Academy training videos. Her courses include subjects on Google Tag Manager, Google Analytics for beginners, advanced analytics, and power users. She's had over 100 speaking engagements all over the world, including Google I/O, MozCon, Conversion, Excel Live, Sheer Love, SMX, and Opticon. Her website is covering all things important in regards to setting up GA4, and that's why we wanted to have her on the show today. Make sure that you check out the first segment of the Krista Seiden episodes because we really dug into what's happening in Google Analytics and the announcement that was actually covered. We discussed in our first segment the announcement from Google that they'd be sunsetting Google Analytics 3 or Universal Analytics on July 1st, 2023, meaning that you're not going to be able to have your current free version of Universal Analytics collecting data past that point. And to top it all off, that data will disappear 6 months after. Now, we've had this announcement for the last 15 months, so we covered a lot of why it's happening now and what you should be doing. Yes, most importantly, jumping in and getting Google Analytics 4 tracking on your websites is the most important thing. Krista, again, thank you for coming back to the show here. I do appreciate your time.
Yeah, of course. Thanks again for having me.
You're more than welcome. More than welcome. So, jumping into some of the reactions again, there have been some strong reactions regarding the announcement as well as the parameters that they're setting for the sunsetting of Universal Analytics. Can you give me some of what you've been experiencing, just some quick takes that the SEO community at large has been throwing out there, not just SEO, but digital marketing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the SEO community in particular is pretty heated about this announcement. But the web analytics community in general is right.
Hmm.
It's very impactful to what they do. So of course we've been hearing things like, "Why is this happening? We like Universal like it is.
Hmm.
GA4 is missing all the things." Those kind of things. And there's been various levels of how kind or not kind people have been in those particular comments.
Hmm.
But it is what it is. I have to tell you, I was actually speaking at Search Lab, which is an SEO event recently, just a couple weeks ago. And I was pretty nervous, right? It's a room full of SEOs, and I'm going up there to tell them this bad news that GA, as they know it, is going away and they have to change everything they're doing. But it was actually really well received. And a lot of people told me they thought that the talk was great and they
Hmm.
were excited to get going, or that at least some of the things that I said made them hate GA4 a little bit less, which I think is actually a pretty high compliment coming from an SEO. So yeah, I mean, I think the feedback is mixed, but we're on this new path.
Absolutely. And yeah, and again, we covered a number of things of how much time we've had to be able to jump in and start using it. And we've covered your history in GA, and certainly, again, ask our listeners to go back to the first episode and be able to understand how involved Krista has actually been in the formation of GA4. So we wanted to make sure that we got a principal party talking to us today on the show. So the biggest difference between Universal Analytics and GA4 is the measurement model that they use. Universal Analytics uses a measurement model based on sessions and
Mhm.
page views, contrasting that Google Analytics 4 uses a measurement model based on events and parameters. For example, in GA4 there, again, for our audience that isn't completely familiar with what we're talking about here, there's an event called page view, and this event contains parameters like page underscore location, page underscore refer, and page underscore title. All those are parameters off of from an event status. It's the same thing. We're just naming it a little bit differently, correct?
It's mostly the same thing.
Mostly the same thing. Yeah, yeah.
So, everything, like you said, everything in Google Analytics 4 is an event. Even a page view is an event.
Hmm.
And, page views in general should be pretty similar between Universal Analytics and GA4. Other things are going to be less similar. You said, Universal Analytics is based on this idea of sessions, and everything in Universal Analytics is actually sessionized in how the data is collected and processed. GA4 is very different. They do have a metric called sessions, but it's actually just based on one event called session start. And
Oh,
things are
cool.
not sessionized in the same way. So the data is going to look pretty different between the two.
Understood. Understood. And I'm not telling you anything that you don't know. You're helping navigate this. There are events in GA4 that are grouped into four categories. One is the automatically collected events. These are events that are automatically tracked by the GA4 base code. That is page view, first visit, and session start, like you said. Anything else that you wanted to embellish on the automatically collected events?
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially what you said. It's also kind of engagement time and timing events like heartbeat. There's a heartbeat type event that goes in GA4 to help with the engaged session metrics.
Oh, cool.
If you are doing app tracking, there's first app open, those types of things. But yeah, it's essentially kind of that out of the box like page view tracking. You'll get user tracking and those kind of things with just the base snippet.
Can I ask about heartbeat a little bit? Like, could it be something so bold as to be able to move away pages or sessions that actually just got left there on a screen as opposed to an active engagement?
Yeah, so Google is looking at that in different ways in GA4.
Uh-huh.
They are trying to get an idea if a browser tab is in focus, if it's being interacted with,
Perfect.
based on what they can pull from the browser.
Right.
And so I do think that just engagement or engaged sessions is a much better metric within GA4. It
Absolutely.
actually comes from app tracking though, so this goes back to the days of Google Analytics for Firebase or Firebase Analytics. If you think about engagement there, when you are engaged on an app, the app is in the foreground, right?
Yep.
You generally don't have more than one app in the foreground at a time. And so the tool can get a pretty good idea of what that engagement time is. And so they use some of that same logic and tried to bring that to the browser to get a much better idea of actual engagement time in the browser window itself.
Excellent. Excellent. That's actually pretty valuable, all things considered. And that's not
Totally.
something we were completely blind to in UA. All right, so moving on, enhanced measurement events are another category of events. Basically, alongside the base code, you can also enable or disable these enhanced measurements based on your website functionality. They include scrolls, outbound clicks, site search, and video engagement. That's fantastic that it's also there and ready to be able to be sprung to action based on the needs. Yeah?
Yeah, I love this. There's 6 events out of the box that come with this. And essentially anybody who is just putting that base code in and doesn't really have developer resources or the time or effort to be able to implement a lot of custom events, these are a bunch of bonus events that you're getting that are going to make your data collection much more robust than what you got just out of the box in Universal Analytics.
Beautiful. Moving on, we also have recommended events. This is really interesting. These are events that Google recommends you set up and have you split into industry type. Other than e-commerce, recommended events also seem to be kind of broad recommendations, and naming conventions aren't really essential. Can you give us an idea of what recommended events are? And is this what I think this is? This is an algorithm learning tool to be able to understand your site a little bit more?
So I think that Google wanted recommended events to be, helpful in terms of more structured data.
Mhm.
And the promise initially was, if you use these recommended events, then we'll know what to expect. We can provide more specific reporting for that.
Okay.
I think that is surfaced in a couple of places, but not as much as I would like to see. So I'm hopeful that we'll get more of that. But essentially, exactly what you're saying. Google has a list of a bunch of events by vertical or by use case, and it says, hey, if you are using an event for some kind of a lead gen form on your site,
Mhm.
we recommend that you use the event named generate_lead. If you do this, we know what this is, we know what to expect, and we can potentially provide you additional reporting on this.
Yeah, probably have
So
some
I do think
additional.
that there's
So,
a benefit in doing that, but it's more just around structured data
got
and
it.
the hope that there's going to be more specific reports.
Yeah, I got my gears going, because you could also have those additional sub events or related events as you start choosing these different functions that you do want to actually model against. So there's an entire pattern of machine learning that can come along for the ride as you bring in a recommended event in, right?
Totally. And if you think about even that BigQuery export, right, and
Mhm.
all of the different models and packages that you could potentially run on your data,
Right.
if you're using recommended events and other people are using these recommended events, they may have models for you to apply to this type of data since it's much more structured.
Got it. Got it. Final on our journey here of the categorization of events, custom events. Bum, bum, bum. There's the beautiful changes that you can actually put in. These are events and parameters that you can create and implement yourself based on website requirements. The current limits are, and that could change obviously in the future, are 500 distinctly named events. That's actually more than we've ever had before, correct?
So that distinction is actually going to be app specific,
Okay.
and it's interesting. It wasn't really a hard line previously. You could have kind of as many combinations of that category action label event as you wanted.
Mhm.
Now Google's saying, if you're using the event name generate_lead, you can have 500 unique event names like that
Oh, wow.
on the Naps instance.
Got it.
For web, there is no limit. And people initially thought this was a pretty limiting thing with 500. I would argue that you probably don't need more than 500. 500 seems very excessive to me for event names for a GA4 implementation. Most implementations that I've been doing over the past couple of years have somewhere between maybe 10 and 50 unique event names. And you really don't want to have a ton. You want to be reusing those same event names. So
Mhm.
I actually, I would be a fan of there being a limit on the website, even though there's not, because I think it helps to streamline implementations much nicer.
Absolutely, yeah. You got to make sure you. We've run into the limitation, obviously, with UA and the goal limitations and particular
That is a
profiles.
huge limit.
That's huge. At least we don't have that hanging over us, because trying to figure out the top 25 things that you're really wanting to measure at a per profile without any type of crossover. We had a few holes in our wall as we were slamming our heads into it
For
regularly. All right, so I appreciate your embellishments there to be able to shepherd us through those different categories. Integrations, Google Ads, DV360, Search Console, BigQuery. Unpack that for us. BigQuery was originally, like you said in the previous show, just for GA360. Now it's available in GA4 for free. That's
Yeah.
pretty huge.
It's huge. Like I don't think we can overstate this enough. I think GA4 having a free integration to BigQuery really unlocks a lot of additional value for
Mhm.
so many customers. You can get that raw event stream of data now into a data warehouse to do whatever you want to do with it. Add in your own first party data or other data resources that you want to combine. You
Mhm.
can do a lot of additional modeling. You can take that data from BigQuery to elsewhere. It really, really opens up so many options for companies that are doing a lot more advanced things. And this previously, like you said, was only available to 360 customers. So I think this is actually one of the biggest enhancements to GA4 in general, is that this is now available to everybody. And so I actually have been recommending to everybody that when they set up their GA4 property, one of the first things that they should do is link to BigQuery.
Mhm.
The linking itself is free to set up. The
Mhm.
export is free. You do have to have a GCP account with BigQuery to enable this, of course. And if you surpass the free tier of data, then you will need a credit card on file with GCP to pay for that data storage and querying costs.
Got it.
The costs are actually really low, so it's not a big deal for most customers. But I think there's a huge, huge benefit. And back to kind of that data retention policy that we talked about previously, with
Mhm.
14 months of data that you're going to be able to really do deep dive analysis on in the UI, the ability to have that data in BigQuery and do analysis on it for a much longer time period is also, that's high value and worth a small additional cost, in my opinion.
Absolutely, and it's very similar to the API costs. What Google charges for 25,000 calls is such pennies, but
It's tiny.
it really is, and that's just going to be the cost of doing business in the digital world. You have to spend money on your web hosting, you have to spend money on your WAF, have to spend money on a number of different things regularly for your digital properties. This is going to be something that you're going to have to invest in regularly, and it's again
Right.
negligible to be able to see how much
Yeah.
data you've got to be able to play with.
It's
Um,
optional. So if you don't want
sure.
to spend the money, you absolutely don't have to. But I think it's worth it.
We're proud to have Wix as a sponsor of our Edge of the Web interview podcast series. They're always building. Check out what's happening on Wix. Fresh off the press, bot log reports get an easy understanding of how bots are crawling your site without any complicated setup right inside of Wix. There's so much more you can do with Wix. You can now add dynamic structured data, upload redirects in a bulk, including error notification and warning, and fully customized meta tags and robot.txt files. Visit today, wix.com/SEO to learn more. Wix, always evolving. All right, I'm going to pull the car over to the side of the road here for a second and ask you a bit of a sidebar question. There's some bouncing theories around here, a little bit of conspiracy theory. And I know you're a huge advocate of Google, and I would never want you to bite the hand that fed you, right? But
I tell it like it is.
okay, well, I mean, there's conspiracy theory of Google wanting everybody to move into a paid environment for similar to 360, and we all knew that the threshold was huge to be able to see what you had in there. Is that even a remote thought that all of this migration will actually start being a coin-operated system, for lack of a better metaphor?
Um, Look, I don't believe that. Um, I do think that there are some features and functionality that were available for free to everybody in Universal Analytics that
Mhm.
are now going to be more of a paid option
Mhm.
as a 360 customer. So, for example, some properties, which are kind of like views, are now only available to paid customers. But I also know that the threshold for kind of getting into that paid tier is going to be lower in 360. So I think that may open that up a bit.
Okay.
I've also heard a lot of conspiracy theories around how Google is pushing everybody to BigQuery. You can't do it in the UI, but you can do it in BigQuery. So they just want to make money and get people into cloud and using that as an onboarding path there. And I also don't think that is true. Having a little bit of background there and seeing the early development, I think the idea that you can't do it in the UI, so you have to go to BigQuery, was more out of just bandwidth of being able to build in new features in GA4 and how fast they could run there versus how fast a customer really needs to be able to do certain things. So yes, if you can't do it in the UI, you can probably do it in BigQuery,
Mhm.
but I don't think that that is Google actually trying to push everybody there. That being said, I still think it's a great resource, and especially now that it's free to everybody, you should take advantage of it. But I don't think this is like some big conspiracy where Google's trying to push everybody either into a paid tier of GA4
Right.
or into BigQuery. I think they are, dedicated to having a free product that is useful for the majority of people. But that usefulness is probably going to look a little bit different from Universal Analytics.
Understood. I appreciate that insight, because without that much knowledge in the background, right, you could easily see how people can actually get to that very, very quickly. So I'm glad to be able to hear that your perspective and that side of the equation. All right, let's shift back over. We're driving down the road here. Talk to us about real-time reporting. What's different? What's the same in this space?
Yeah, so I actually love real-time reporting in GA4. I think this is a much improved feature. It looks very different than Universal Analytics. So if you've looked at it, you'll know it's kind of this map-based feature with like a bunch of like bubbles that highlight different areas where people are. You can kind of interact with that on the map. But it has a bunch of kind of cards or widgets below that go into detail about a lot of different things. And I think there is a lot more detail here, some of it different than what you had in Universal. And one thing in particular that I really like is there is a card called event count by event name. And that is a card that you can actually drill in. So you can click the event name, and it will show you the parameters for that event. So, for
Mhm.
example, if I have a purchase event, I can click on that event name and I can see all of the parameters. I can see, parameters, for example, for value or transaction ID. And if I click into the parameters, I will see the values of those.
Mhm.
So I can see, the price that somebody's paying or the transaction ID. And I think this is great for two reasons. One, it just feeds into that need that we all have to see how many people are on our site, how many people are buying things at, this exact moment.
Right.
But two, it is great for debugging, like so much better for debugging than we had in Universal. And on top of that, there's also debug view, which is kind of a stream of those events coming in as well. But I really like the new real-time reporting. I think it's very, very useful.
What you're saying is that it's not at a per event. It's a per event, but it's underneath that event are multiple users, multiple interactions that you can actually segment and separate. So you have
Yeah.
am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, you can drill into each event. So if
Fantastic.
you see that you have, for example, even the page view event, you can see you had 1,000 page views in the last 30 minutes. Actually, sidebar, that's an important note. Real time in Universal Analytics is based on like right now, it's only tracking like the last 1 or 2 minutes of interaction on the site. In GA4, it's actually the last 30 minutes. So the numbers will be higher overall. Keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
But page views, right? You have 1,000 of them. You can drill in and see the page titles, and it might list, 20 different page titles, and you can see actually by page title, there was
Wow.
600 people on this one and
Yep.
20 people on this one, and you can drill into that and see the values
Yeah.
that might be associated there.
Much
So
better
I think it's
organization.
pretty cool.
Much better organization than what we've had before in Real. All right.
Yeah.
So, what other advantages? And I know you're a huge proponent for it. Let's break out the advantages of GA4 for the listener base of the novice as well as the seasoned UA that probably has a few events and customizations put in there. What are the advantages jumping into GA outside of the fact that that's what we have to work with? Give us the lay of the land there.
I think that there are a lot of advantages to GA4. And sure, some of these will be controversial.
Sure.
But we've talked about some of these. Enhanced measurement, I think, is great, helps to collect more data, democratize data. The linkings, especially to BigQuery, I think that's amazing that that's now available to everybody. I love that you can customize the UI. I can make reports titled whatever I want them to be with whatever metrics and dimensions. A great example of this is my blog, for example, it's just a blog. There's no e-commerce revenue on it.
Right.
But when you look at a pages and screens report in GA4, there's a column with the metric of total revenue. I don't need that column in that report because I don't have any revenue for that site. And if somebody else is analyzing this data, they might get confused and be like, oh my gosh, Krista, why do you have no revenue? Is this broken?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's not something I need. I can actually customize that report and remove that metric from it. So I think that that's great to be able to tailor reports more to your needs or your customers' needs.
Sure.
What else? I love the explore section. So we haven't really talked about this.
No.
There's this deep dive reporting section called explore. And it used to only be available for 360 customers in Universal Analytics. And even then, only a couple of the techniques or the analysis options were available. Now there's a bunch more. So you can do things like funnel reporting, freeform, which is kind of like a table report on steroids, pathing, which I really like. I have to, mention there that I like it also because I built it when I was still at Google, but hey, I'm a little biased on that one, I guess. Segment overlap, lifetime value, user explorer. There's several ways to really dive into your data at a much more detailed level. You could choose the metrics and dimensions that you want in reports and kind of build them out to your heart's desire. So I love that that's like a much deeper dive tool. It does kind of on the flip side take more training and more understanding of the actual data model and the data that you're collecting to be able to use it correctly. So I think it is an advanced feature, an advanced user tool, but one that is worth investing in terms of the time to like learn it and get up to speed there, because there's a lot of value to be had. What else? I love the new data model.
I'll pause you. That's all right. It's all right. I just wanted to make sure that the users understand my take on Explore, and I appreciate your insight there that this is something that really does need to be unpacked, even to a greater degree. This is kind of like I liken it to Google Data Studio marrying into the user flow application inside of UA. There's so much customization there. There's so many additional variables where we didn't have it in the user flow diagram. We do have it in this Explorer application. So I was not intentionally non-serving that area. It is a very, very cool application. That gives you a behavioral analysis from a visual standpoint that is where we should be into our mindset of user behavior. Absolutely. All right.
Yeah, there's some really, really powerful tools in there. Just on those flow reports, I just have a funny comment to add there. When I became a PM on Google Analytics, one of the things that I told my boss and pretty much any PM who would listen was it was my goal as a PM to kill the user flow reports in Universal Analytics because I thought they were that bad. I hate them. So that was actually how redesigning it and creating pathing was assigned to me.
Very good. So I appreciate it. Well, you have a much better product now. So I'm literally looking at the screen.
There's still a ways to go, but I think it's a great starting point.
Fantastic. And you were going to go into additional data modeling. What's one more final advantage here?
So, I think the data model is a lot more flexible, right? You can choose an event name. So let's, put this into perspective. If you are a publisher, let's say you're the New York Times, and people are looking at, all sorts of articles on your website. What really matters to you as, either the writer, the author, or as the New York Times is not necessarily how many, different page views that you are getting. It's how many eyes are on the actual content, right?
Right.
And so you can have an event like a content view for every particular piece of content and have parameters like content ID, author name, author ID, like so many different things, the 25 parameters sent with every time that content is viewed. And now when you think about how you analyze that data, you don't have to pull a pages report and look at, kind of guessing or adding up all the different pages where a particular piece of content might have lived, because maybe it was on the home page and had its own page and it was in another section. You can actually pull the content view event specifically for that article itself and analyze that and see a kind of whole view of that data. But you can break it down by the page that it was on still, because it's also collecting the page title, page location information as parameters as well. So I actually think it's a lot more flexible. It gives us a lot more ability to add additional insight and information to every event that we're collecting. So I think there's really good things to be had with this data model.
We're proud to have Site Strategics as a sponsor of Edge of the Web. We're pioneers in the agile digital marketing methodology. Core specialties that we provide are technical SEO, including core web vitals optimization, search engine marketing, social media marketing and management, focus on conversion rate optimization, truly focus on results-based marketing that works. We've also developed a unique omni-channel media marketing and content curation process that's guided by our weekly R&D. From our Edge of the Web interviews, we incorporate the best techniques for our content broadcast strategy and execution. If you're interested in what we can do for you, just give us a call at 877-SEO for Web or 877-736-4932. Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. For our users to understand the maturation of and why GA4 exists, we are in a world of cross-device attribution, and UA, our current Google Analytics, has so many limitations to be able to match a user against all the devices that we have. I got 2 bloody devices right here. We usually are executing with more. We're screening on a regular basis. So to be able to actually move to that user model where we can actually clearly see that multi-device connection to a user is an essential part of GA, as I see it. Is that what was the impetus, at least to a particular degree, of what GA was meant to do?
Yeah. I actually think it's funny when you think about the name Universal Analytics,
Yeah.
right? It
Yep.
actually came out with this promise of tying things together, and I don't think it ever delivered on that promise. I think it significantly under delivered on that respect of it.
Yep.
And that is what GA4 was kind of built to do, right? The original name of it was App plus Web. The idea that you could bring an app data stream and a web data stream into the same property,
Yep.
and via user identity, either with user ID, device ID, or Google Signals, be able to tie together those users across device and get a much better understanding of the total user journey or the total number of users that are interacting with your site. And so, yeah, I think GA4 is much better positioned to do all of that and was built from the beginning with that in mind.
Very good. And that's foundational, along with the additional foundation of predictive audience and metrics. We know that we can't see all the data. So now with this additional algorithm, additional machine learning, we can now actually start seeing different model of future transactions and revenue based on what is actually extrapolating from the user behavior. And that's something that we've never had before in any analytics platform, right?
Yeah, totally. GA4 is built for this new kind of cookieless world, and this world where we don't have as much insight into the data or into all of the users visiting our site. And so it has things like conversion modeling and behavior modeling, and as you said, predictive metrics.
Mhm.
And I think the predictive metrics take it even further, right? Because these are using statistical models to say, like, we see that you've had kind of these things in the past, and based on other things that we know about your site and your user behavior, we predict that you might have, this percentage of churn. And you can break that down by channel to see if, you're getting more churn from SEO traffic or from paid traffic or social or whatnot. And that actually gives you a lot more insight into what you should be doing for those particular channels, right?
Mhm.
And so I love the ability that GA4 is trying to bring to the table with all of this to help fill in a lot of the gaps that we might not have previously in Universal because of things that are missing, like consent or various cookies. But also take it one step further to then model on that data and help predict things that are going to help you improve your business.
Understood. Understood. All right. So we made the case. GA4 didn't have to because here anyway. But the point is, we want to educate our users to actually understand what it is, how. I mean, because everybody is bitching and moaning about the UX. That's not the point. The UX is your customization. It's your involvement, and we have the opportunity to be able to make our digital marketing cases that much more strong for our own teams as well as our own customers by investing time into this. So be able to migrate data, you're going to have to take time to be able to unpin and be able to reset all of your different events and your triggers, your goals. Yeah, you're always going to have to invest time to be able to measure how you're performing. And there's all these tools that are evolving. This is not any different, and it's also a vast improvement based on the world we're in right now. So we're jettisoning a 20-year-old model and getting into the future of how to actually analyze behavior. So with that, let's talk about training here with a brief couple of minutes here. How much training would a seasoned UA user need to get up to speed to be comfortable with GA4?
I think there's no substitute, like I said previously, no substitute for being hands-on. But I think the best way to really understand GA4 is to be hands-on with data that you're already familiar with, right? So you need to get GA4 implemented on your site and you need to start playing with it. Now, I will say for even a seasoned analytics person, the foundational elements that you've learned from Universal Analytics and your ability to do analysis and understand metrics and dimensions are going to be a huge leg up, and it's going to really help you in GA4.
Hmm.
But you do have to learn this new data model, and you do have to learn the new UI and how things are done in GA4. I helped build GA4, and I'm still learning things that are different and how to navigate in this world. So I do think that there is a learning curve. But I don't think that most of us are starting from scratch, right? We have a foundation of universal analytics. And I think the biggest thing that is missing right now is actually going into GA4 with an open mind. Previously, before the deprecation announcement, we were looking at it as this new thing from Google, but it's just there and I don't have to use it.
Right.
Now we're looking at it as, this is something I have to learn. And so hopefully we're going to look at this tool with a little bit more of an open mind and say like, okay, I'm going to give it a chance. I'm going to try to learn to do these things and start to force myself to practice here. But yeah, I think training is a really key element. And I definitely encourage, especially if you need to get up to speed fast,
Yep.
that you read blogs, take courses, do whatever you need to do, get hands-on so that you can learn this tool quickly.
Absolutely. So is there a cheat sheet of like where do I questions to convert common tasks or reports from UA to GA4?
I don't think there's any one particular cheat sheet because there's a lot of things that people want to do
Right.
that they did in UA and now want to do in GA4. I know I've written a lot about many of these things on my blog, and I have a YouTube channel with quick tip videos that I talk about a lot of these things. For example, I have one video called "Where Did My Bounce Rate Go?" And I talk about bounce rate in Universal Analytics and how it's now engaged sessions in GA4.
Right.
So not any particular one cheat sheet. But I think, think about the things that you want to learn how to do, and there's plenty of material out there for those things.
Very good. Very good. All right. So last question on this round here is someone who's actually new to SEO coming in. We've got some seasoned years behind us, but fresh new talent coming in. Do you see any advantage of learning UA alongside GA4, or should they just jump directly into GA4?
That's a good question. I think it's a tough one. We only have a little over a year left of UA's lifespan.
Right.
That being said, I think most clients that you're going to be working with as a new SEO, whether you're a consultant or you're in-house, will be grounded in Universal Analytics. So I do think that there is still a benefit. And like I said, I think if you have those foundational skills of just analysis and how things work between metrics and dimensions from UA, you'll be a step up for GA4. So I would focus the majority of your time and effort probably on GA4, but
Right.
I think it could be beneficial to at least learn some of the basics of UA as well. And then the other thing I'll say there is actually for all KS Digital clients, we are no longer dealing with Universal Analytics, only to the extent that the client, needing to migrate to
Got it.
GA4 has Universal. We'll look at their Universal setup just so we understand what they were collecting and what they may want to migrate over to GA4.
Right.
But we're not doing any implementation or
No,
setup
of course
of
not.
Universal Analytics. I don't see the point anymore.
Nope, absolutely not. Very good. Very good. Krista, it's been an absolute pleasure listening and finding out from one of the principal PMs towards GA4. Couldn't be closer to the source unless we are actually in the Google paddock. So thank you so much for your time today. To kind of round out this conversation, what really bugs you about your industry right now?
I think people have been really harsh on GA4.
Sure.
I think, like I said, we need to have a little bit more of an open mind. I get it. It's a tough transition. It's a brand new tool that doesn't look or feel anything like we've been used to. But I think it's really tough to move forward if we can't keep an open mind. So I think that's one of the things. And I think, there's a big changing landscape in the industry in general, right? With privacy regulations and browsers and everything like that. And so I do think that makes it harder to keep up. And so there's so many things going on right now that we need to learn and do as analysts, as SEOs, as digital marketers. And so I think it's a tough time to be in this industry, but I also think it's a really exciting time and we have
Sure.
a lot of new opportunities coming.
Absolutely. All right. So conversely, I think you're already there, is what excites you about your industry right now?
Yeah,
GA4.
so much. GA4, like that's what I live and breathe every day, right? Is GA4, and I think there's a lot of really cool things coming to it. A lot of things that are hopefully going to relieve some of the anxiety over moving to GA4. I'm really interested to see what companies come out with over the next year in terms of how they're going to help customers move.
Mhm.
I personally am really excited about training. So, KS Digital Academy has a lot of training courses on Google Analytics 4, and we're investing a lot of time to continue to build those out. We are constantly updating content and adding more as new features come out in GA4. And so, for me personally, that is very exciting. And I'm just excited to see the evolution of where this product goes and
Absolutely.
how it really starts to get adopted and hopefully loved in the future. I think there's a lot of things to love about it. Sure, there's a lot of things to hate about it right now too, but that was the same with
Yeah, but
Universal
they're
as well.
armchair warriors, right? It's like, okay, if you really wanted to get into it, do what Krista did and actually get involved and build something with Google. Sorry, maybe not
Yeah.
everybody has that chance, but
Hey, they're hiring constantly, so
yeah, they are. It's amazing to be able to hear from you and understand the depth of knowledge that you have in this space and the championing that you're doing as we're coming out of dry dock, so to speak. I mean, we've had GA4 for 15 months. Now it's time to get real, folks, and be able to plug in. Certainly, we want to promote what Krista is doing with her education. So over at academy.ksdigital.co, Edge of the Web listeners actually can take $200 off any non-intro GA4 course or bundle with the code EDGE. We certainly appreciate that offer to our listeners, and we're going to sew that back into our first segment as well. Fantastic discount there, and highly recommend the courses that you're providing. And again, we may actually swing back around and talk to you a little bit about that for
Definitely.
our own team. Anything else that we can promote for you on our session here?
Yeah, I'd love if you give me a follow on Twitter. I constantly tweet about Google Analytics 4 content and occasionally some cute dog and kid pictures as well. So there's a good mix of content in there. And also I blog a ton at KristaSeiden.com about GA4. So a lot of free, very useful, or I guess I'm biased because I wrote it, but I think it's very useful content there for you. So I would just love if you, gave me a follow, subscribe to my list, and I will keep you updated on all things GA4.
Absolutely. Well, I can promise you that Site Strategics is going to be listening to you closely. It's invaluable what you're sharing with the digital marketing audience, the digital marketing industry right now. All right. So from all of us, thank you so much for your time today. Make sure that you follow Krista on Twitter at Krista, KristaSeiden. And also track her down on LinkedIn with the very same name. I'm not going to try to, unfortunately, misspell it again, but you're doing a fantastic job. Keep up the good work. We certainly appreciate what you're doing there. With that, we want to make sure that you follow her and listen to this first episode of our interview as well. Thanks from all of us over at The Edge, Krista. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
You're more than welcome. All right. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Edge of the Web on YouTube. And if you're feeling really up to it today, drop us a quick review on iTunes as well. Thanks to our sponsors of the podcast here. Make sure you check out all the must-see videos and much more over at edgeofthewebradio.com. That's edgeofthewebradio.com. From all of us over at Site Strategics and Edge, get on GA4 now. As soon as you listen to this show, actually before you listen to this show, get on GA4. I have no idea how you can do it, but do it. And stay safe, stay well, and do not be a piece of cyber driftwood. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.